It is an honor and a privilege to be here with you, Dina. Thank you. Meeting you has definitely changed my life for the better,
Oh,
and I'm very grateful for that.
I love what you're doing. I love the platform. I'm a fan of your social media, and I think you're doing really important work around many things, right? I mean, around domestic abuse, divorce, life changes, and even touching on stories of recovery.
but thank you, Dana. I think you do an amazing job from what I've seen, and I've watched a few of your podcasts, and I've done a lot of podcasts and that, and you let people just talk. It flows out of them.
Welcome back to the show. This is the Life Changes Channel podcast, and I'm your host, Dina Court. I am also the publisher of Divorce Magazine Canada and Life Changes Magazine. Those are digital, they're quarterly, they're online, there's newsletters. And what is in them? Who's it for? I know I talk about it all the time that I'm publishing these magazines, but these are resources with very supportive, informative articles written by our experts and our professionals. And you can find answers to some of the questions with the struggles that you are facing right now through life changes, but also especially a lot of content around divorce. There's also career guidance. There's health and wellness and parenting, a lot of different pieces of information for you. So please be sure to check those out and read them. They're free. Sign up so that you can get notifications when we do have something new that's coming out or an announcement. We also host every 2 weeks online support groups. Those are easy to access from wherever you are. So please check out our event page. All the links for all of this are in the show notes. Now, if you've been here a while, you know that something I'm very passionate about is talking about domestic abuse, domestic violence, bringing more awareness to that. And if you're new here, welcome. This isn't the only thing we talk about, but sadly, there is an epidemic right now of domestic abuse and violence in families. And as much as it's very prevalent, it's very misunderstood, and people don't really understand what is abuse. And it's not just physical. In fact, most of the abuse is, if it's physical, it includes non-physical abuse, coercive control, power over, that kind of thing. Please go back and listen to all the other episodes, and please make yourself aware of what it is, because it could be you and you don't know it. And that sounds so strange, but we talk about why it's hard to know that. You've been undermined, your value has been eroded. And it doesn't matter how smart you are, how rich you are, how educated you are, how successful you are, you can be a victim of this. It may be somebody that you care about or somebody that you know. Now, my guest today on this Hope in Hell episode, in this Hope in Hell series, is Tina Huggins. Now, she has personal experience with this. She also is a high conflict divorce coach. And we are going to have a discussion. She's going to share some of her story and people that she loves, what she's witnessed with them. I think you're going to find this enlightening, and hopefully you feel compelled to get curious about your own life or somebody else you care, and reach in or reach out for help. Reach in if it looks like you could be a support. Okay, that's heavy. It's heavy stuff, but people are living it. They're living in unsafe spaces and environments. And it's up to us to try and understand better so that we can help them. Let's talk to Tina now. Welcome to the Life Changes Channel podcast. We have Tina with us today, and Tina has a very interesting story, and she's doing some powerful things now to help people. It's just, it's easiest if I just let her tell you all of this. And I think you're going to be enlightened. And I love that she has, if anybody's listening, and you might want to go check out the video too, because behind her, she's got the word awakening right behind her. Yes. Divorce and narcissist conflict specialists on the Awakening show. And if that doesn't get you interested, because you know that this is something you hear from me quite a bit, and now I'm bringing another very passionate person around this same topic. So welcome, Tina. Let us know who you are, what you do. Let's just dive right in.
Thank you, Deanna, very much. Okay, so we know my name, Tina, and I'm Tina Huggins. I'm a certified divorce coach and I'm a restorative family mediator. And my background actually comes in years ago from law enforcement. And during that time, I would help women and children get out of abusive relationships and into safe homes and safe places. Also, during that time, I would teach self defense in the battered women's shelter. Fast forward a few years, my father was almost murdered in one of his relationships. And I would love to say that was the end of his story there, but it wasn't. He went on and he's with a third woman who is as abusive, although not as much as the first one. He was shot at, driven over with a truck. Helped him get out of that relationship unscathed financially as well as physically. And fast forward a few more years, I ended up working on a case for an attorney, actually my husband's case, doing paper investigation. And over the years, I have been coaching for over 30 years. And over those years, I had done coaching in the divorce arena, but it was just sporadic here and there. And then I ended up on this case where I'm doing paper investigation. And I suggested a few things to that attorney that he should try or do, and he had never heard of these before. And I realized right then my husband was being abused horribly, specifically at that moment, financially abused. And so that's when I decided that it was time to get some sort of certification. So I sought out my certification and I've just kept going from there. My personal story comes in from an abusive relationship with my ex, and I'm not going to call him an abuser. Ours was situational, and there is a difference between having an abuser. In my case, what I'm talking about is the physical abuse that I went through. He was verbally abusive, so that I can say. But I ended up with a broken hand, separated ribs, and in our final fight, the one that I realized I was being abused because I didn't realize that that was physical abuse early on. So the one that I realized was he tossed me out of my van across the yard and dislocated my left leg. And it was at that moment that I realized, oh, this is unsafe. And the longer it goes, the worse it's going to get. So that's the basic. And now I'm doing high conflict divorce. I understand the conflict. And I just had a client just yesterday said, how can you handle all this turmoil and be good? And so my answer to that, to her and to everybody that asks, is it's this relationship with my higher power, God, however you see that, that helps me stay centered and grounded so that I can help my clients who can't be centered and grounded at the time. So that's part of my story there, Deanna.
That is fascinating because there's always a root to people's passion, and they take that, it's your choice how you're going to take that and roll with that. And I think for me, I've had phases where it's like, no, I'm finally realized what I was in. I'm out of it now, and I want it left behind. And then as you face different things or you encounter different people, you realize that maybe there's an invitation there that you can make some good out of what you experienced. And I feel like that's where you are. You've witnessed it in people that you love. You've experienced it yourself personally, and now you're taking steps and you're helping other people. You've continued to do that. You did this, and then like, oh, I see a need there. And if I want to empower myself to help people, then you educated yourself, you situated yourself so that you were in a position to help people. And so what the piece that I don't often hear, and I've asked before, when I talk to people who are helping others in this way, is how do you deal with all of that, that you take in? And I love that you are connected that way, that you have this grounding, centering relationship with your higher self, a higher power, whatever people want to call it, because I think we have to know and trust that there's something more powerful than the abusers or the ones who are using abuse to control others. And honestly, that's what kept me sane all through
Mm,
the years.
yeah, it's a very dark place. All the time you're going through that, the depression that's there, the lack of sleep, or the abundance of sleep but no rest. I think some people can resonate with that. They sleep all day long because they're just so beat up, but they're not ever feeling rested. And that darkness, I remember being in that dark space, and that's when I'm like, why is this so dark when I have this connection? And so that's when I started reaching out for more learning, more help, more support from others.
What do you find when you have conversations with, just the general public in community type relationships and settings? What are some of the gaps that you find that people have around understanding abuse or understanding how to help someone if they're concerned?
So there's a few gaps there. And I think the first gap is that a lot of people don't understand what a divorce coach is and what a divorce coach can do, especially those of us who are trained in the high conflict. And my specialty is high conflict with abuse. And
Ooh.
so I kind of explain that to my clients as we all understand what a wedding planner is. They're everything wedding from the cake to the venue. Well, I'm everything divorce from thinking about it clear through the process to the other end. I help you on the recovery side, either heal or help you with new jobs and things like that. I do have a life coaching background that helps with that end as well. Um, then for them to understand that my job is to help them deal with not just the abuse and the stress that causes, but to help them deal with finding the right attorney, because attorneys are not one size fits all. Divorce attorneys come in different types of attorneys and different types of working through that. And that understanding and understanding how the attorney bills you and all of those things, along with being able to help my clients with the things, the understanding, preparing paperwork, the financials, that can save my clients right off the bat. I help them with figuring out what attorney. During that process, I help them prep their financials. That saves them just right off the top $3,000 right there before they ever even hire the attorney, because it's about $3,000 is what it will cost that attorney to help you organize all of this stuff that might take you and I weeks to go through, maybe even a couple of months because of the complications of owning businesses and things like that. So that is one of the gaps that I notice. And then the other gap is just in like you were saying, the ability to understand abuse. You can be in abuse. I was and didn't even know that I was being abused. Yeah, I ended up with a broken hand. I ended up with separated ribs and then later a dislocated leg. And that doesn't count the other fights in between where I ended up underneath a pickup truck. I crawled under for protection purposes. And I never saw that as abuse, partly because I'm a martial artist and I saw abuse differently from the inside than I did from the outside. I help people get out of abuse, for goodness sake. You'd think I would know, but I had no clue. It was just a random. He grabbed my wrist. I released because I was trained, hit a door jamb, the hand broke. He threw me down on the bed because he said I was acting crazy and wanted to protect me, put his knee in my chest and separated my ribs. And that's gaslighting. I believed him. I believed I was the one that broke my hand and that I was being crazy. All I wanted to do was get out of the fight. I hated to be yelled at, Deanna. Hated it.
There's still pain there, I feel.
Mm.
I don't think we ever completely heal from it. It's almost like it's there to remind us of what we have overcome and how strong we've been, and, hopefully help us to offer others some insight into what we've seen, and if it resonates with them, that hopefully then it helps them. And I think it's so powerful. You often hear people don't know that they were in an abusive situation, but for you to tell us that you were helping people get out of abusive situations, you were teaching them ways to defend themselves, you were supporting them in that way, you were aware of what abuse was, and yet with the coercive control, the emotional undermining of your own personal self-worth, and whatever was happening in your own personal relationships, you were in a space that you couldn't recognize it in yourself and in your relationship.
So true.
And like, it can happen to absolutely anybody. It doesn't matter how educated, how successful you are. Whoops, sorry, it's my abundance alarm. It doesn't matter how successful you are, how educated, how confident you might feel, you're still going to experience the same type of reaction to being treated with this coercive control pattern. So there's all these little incidents, and you can kind of rationalize them away, and, well, this was my fault, or, maybe this happened, or this was the reason. And what happens is that becomes the pattern that destroys us. Mm-hmm. And yet we don't recognize it, because every single time we've managed to downplay it or disregard it, or try and think the best of that other person or that relationship, or completely take the blame ourselves in many situations, right? So I'm just hammering this point home, because people don't need to guilt themselves or feel like failures if they haven't recognized it and they're in that type of a situation. Because even someone with like, look what you were doing, and you didn't recognize it. So I really want people to hear this.
Yeah, it's the one thing that I tell people when I'm asked, what's the biggest information you could give me that could help me in my situation. One, to understand. I mean, you don't have to understand, but please communicate to somebody. Those that are closest to you, your family, your friends, those are the people. And I'm sure you did the same thing, Deanna, that I didn't tell them because I didn't want them to think negative of him. He was part of me, and I didn't want that negativity. And so I didn't. And 4 years after I had left him, my mom decided she was going to get us back together. So she invited him, myself, our children, who were adults at the time, for Thanksgiving. And he showed up intoxicated, which was how all these fights happened. And he decided to take me down and put me in a chokehold. And I didn't fight back because it was my mom's house. And I figured if he really started to hurt me, then it could get really real. But my youngest son had to pull him off of me. And up to then, my mom always called him for assistance, not my brother, but my ex, for assistance on all kinds of stuff at the house, right? And so after that, he left and her jaw was on the floor. She said, "Oh my God, I never saw that side of him." I'm like, "That's what I've been trying to explain to you." She says, "I always thought you guys were such a good couple." That's what people see on the outside. And that's our doing. We create that goodness. Mm-hmm. So everybody sees this perfect life on the outside because we don't want them to know how ugly it is on the inside.
Well, and it's a reflection of our choices. So I think that's twofold. So we want to portray that we have made a choice that was healthy and good and great. And so we have to maintain that facade. The other damaging part of that is that we start to lose trust in ourself and our choices.
So true.
And we don't know what we can trust because here's an example of some way we trusted our choices and look what happened. And then we trusted staying, and we trusted ourselves to take the blame. We trusted ourselves to downplay the abuse and not even recognize it. So it's like, how can I trust myself? How can I trust other people? And others are totally, you've fooled them. You become this amazing actress in your life, and how you can portray everything's happy, and then try and convince people that it's not, while at the same time trying to admit that it's not to yourself. So you're trying to convince yourself, then you face other people. And this is something that I really talk about a lot, is that creating this awareness so there's a more compassionate community. Because now you're going out and you're trying to explain what you've been living, and people are like, what? That doesn't make sense. Are you sure it's abuse? And you're like, well, actually, I'm not sure it's abuse, because you're still confused. Something interesting, and I've shared this on other episodes, and this happened with a close friend of mine. So I was still in my abusive situation. I wasn't, it was over 25 years at that point. And a friend of mine was leaving a situation that was abusive. I didn't understand mine was abusive. I just knew I didn't like it. I wasn't happy. There was stuff that was not good, but I didn't understand that was abuse because it wasn't physical. And there was a threat of it, but it wasn't physical. And I came across something that was very interesting. And I share this because I hope it helps people. She would say, oh my God, he said this or he did this. And I'd agree with her, like, that's horrible. And then she would defend him. And then I came across something, and I don't remember, I wish I could credit the person that had written it, but it was mind-blowing. So I tried it. She would always feel the need when I would agree with her to defend him. So what I started doing is defending him. So then he did this, he did that. I'm like, well, I know, but he probably didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Or are you sure that's how he meant it? Or maybe he said it in a different way and you just felt offended. I don't know. Like, and I'd try and it made me want to puke in my mouth a little bit to say that, but it was like, and then she would go, no, it was really bad. Like, this is what he said and what he did. Within 2 weeks, she said to me one day, she goes, what's going on? Like, what is different here? She hadn't realized even that my narrative had changed until she started feeling more empowered about what she was feeling when he would treat her that way. And I said, well, I just tried this. And then you didn't feel the need to defend him, to, maintain that facade and try and, and it was amazing how that changed things for her. So I don't know, it might be something people can try. It might not work in every situation or with every person, but we do feel the need to defend our choice by defending that person.
Right. And again, we might talk about it as abusive, but we have yet to label that in our own head as abuse. I remember saying a few things here or there, and I can't even remember who they would have been to, but I remember saying them. He's just being an ass or whatever.
Yeah.
He's drinking too much or something to that effect. But the reality was, I'm comparing him to my father, who, when he was drinking and whatnot, of course, he was a happy drunk. He wouldn't come home until 2-3 o'clock in the morning. My drunk husband was coming home at 7 p.m. He was coming home early. How can that be too much alcohol? How can that be a bad thing? So I'm comparing him. So, I mean, all of us will be in a situation where we think we know what abuse is. I had heard all these stories, helped all these women. And in one case, a young man get out of an abusive situation. And hearing their stories, I knew what abuse was. This did not look just like those stories or like my dad, who wasn't abusive except for financially. And I'm sure that in every situation there is verbal abuse, but I can tell you in every situation, there's also financial abuse. And so those types of things we don't notice. What the heck is financial abuse? We might think we know what verbal abuse is, but we all get into a fight, right? We all elevate our voice. We all say things that maybe we wish we hadn't said. So when does that become abusive? There's all kinds of these questions in our head. And so we don't ever label it as abuse in our head. And we want everybody else to see the pretty picture.
That's a very valid point, Tina. I like that you framed it, like here's one comparison that you noticed, here's another comparison that you noticed, and then we get stuck with, well, that's, you got to meet that definition, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And even like you say, when we say something that we wish we hadn't said, then we're like, oh, was I being abusive? Or you hate to point a finger at somebody else because you're like, yeah, but I said these things, so how can I judge them and point a finger at them? And I want to also ask you, from the work that you've done, sexual abuse between intimate partners isn't something that is often, that I'm hearing talked about or identified, because it's like, well, I'm in a consensually intimate relationship. So when does it become abuse, sexual abuse?
So, and that is a great question. I had sexual abuse in my relationship. Once I admitted things to my husband, then he started forcing sex. I was crying. I mean, he's right there in front of me, right? And he still goes through with his ex, and we don't realize that as sexual abuse. Now, I knew that it was wrong because I was crying and said no, right? And that's what I taught as self-defense. No is no, and so I knew that was wrong, but I never, ever saw it as rape. I knew it was wrong, but I never saw it as rape. And that's force. And that's what I tell people. Anytime you are forced to do something that you animately don't want to do, that's rape. And we can take it beyond sex and in that aspect. Now, men, this is a whole different story for men because they don't get raped by their spouse. They get controlled.
Right.
The woman won't give it up, or they only give it up when they want something. They use it as a coercive control tool. And so in some cases, they're cut off for months or even years in some cases. And these men are just angels. I'm married to one of them now. If they didn't cheat on their spouse during all of that horrible time, they've got to be a great person. But the reality of that is that is how we women, and abusive women, not counting those of us who are not abusive, but that's what we do. We control our spouse with the possibility of sex, or I'm not going to give you sex. And that's how they're sexually abused.
Wow. And I'm happy that you gave an example that includes men, because the rate, like, that I am hearing over and over is 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men are the victims of abuse of some kind, or usually multiple kinds. And we often villainize the men, and that's not fair. And it also, I think, impacts their access to the help that they need and the support they need, because it's like, what? You were abused by her? You're the man. Like, what? And that just is this stigma that is even harder to get past. And as it is, if a man has the courage to speak up, that is huge. And then if they're like knocked down for, criticized for it, and they just, okay, well, I guess maybe it isn't, or it might not be, or whatever, what does that do to their mental health? Like, I am just, I'm so resistant when I'm told to, you got a niche towards the women. I'm like, no, why is the men's suicide rate so high?
Right.
They need support. They need help. And how, I would be interested to know how many of the men who are dying by suicide have experienced abuse. And it might not be from an intimate partner, it might be in the workplace, it might be from colleagues and friends and their own family. It's really heartbreaking. But I'm happy that you mentioned the men as well, because yes, that is definitely a reality. And we do need to be open and compassionate towards them as well.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. And I I love that you talk about how we make it more difficult for men to find the help. Part of it is they are not going to raise their hand and admit that they're abused. My dad still to this day, even after I picked him up from hospitals, right? He still can't put his name in with the word abuse. And I've watched him go from this strong cowboy that he was, farmer rancher, to when his current wife talks, he literally ducks his head in submission and talks quiet. I never thought I would see my dad go through that, but yet that's what I see. And when these men don't feel like they can reach out for help, then they don't reach out for help and they suffer longer. And in all of this, the cases that I know of male suicide in and around me, my work, every single one of them were abused in some form or another. In some cases, it was just repeating the things they had heard over and over in their head. And that abuse is what they were dealing with. It could have been from years earlier, but because they never got the help, they never reached out and got the help, they didn't replace that broken record with a better statement.
Now, I want to wrap this up because we're going to have you back again. And I want people to know that there is a link to the video of this podcast episode on YouTube. We'll also include links and ways that you can reach out to Tina. You can listen to her show as well. But the final thought I want to talk about with you is the fact that physical abuse doesn't stand alone. Most of these abuses don't stand alone. They include other abuses. So if you right now are in a situation that you don't feel comfortable, you don't feel safe, there's an underlying threat of you don't know what, it could be physical, it could be something demeaning, you're kind of on eggshells or you're hypervigilant, even just some of the time. If you are in that kind of a situation, but you're going, but it's not physical, very often it will lead to physical as it worsens. And, why wait? Why wait till that point? Tina, can you expand on this more and speak to how that's usually not one type alone?
Yeah. So basically, it starts off with elevated voices and that's what we're going to see. They're going to be yelling and screaming, but they're also going to separate you from your family and friends, maybe even move you away from them. These types of things will happen without you noticing that. But once things start to escalate, then the fights become more frequent, the yelling becomes louder. Pretty soon they are picking up items or slamming doors and things like that, throwing things. And that is when the verbal abuse then starts to be leaning towards physical abuse. Then you have the physical abuse, and you'll never have physical abuse without the verbal abuse. The verbal abuse started way before and then will lead into that. But like I said earlier, I often see the financial, well, I always see the financial abuse in there somewhere. Once we get through things, we can see it. They might often have legal abuse with that. In some cases, calling the cops on you frequently. That was one of the ones that happened to my dad. It was one of the ones that happened to my current husband. And those types of things will happen. That is part of legal abuse, taking you back and forth to court. That's another form of legal abuse. And then we have, of course, the gaslighting and that aspect of the verbal abuse, but that runs into psychological abuse. And I dealt with that one. So I had the verbal ended up being physical, and the psychological was lasting for a long time that I didn't realize. I'm currently writing a book about abuse, and I have had to tell my story in there. And it's like, wow, these are things I didn't even see.
Amazing. And we'll have you back to talk more around those other types of abuse that you've mentioned, because we could be on here for days talking about the different like some examples of financial abuse and psychological abuse and emotional and and those types of things. But I hope it gets people curious enough that they will start digging in, having opening conversations around this, researching it, and trying to understand what constitutes, what defines these different types of abuse, and then be aware. Notice what you're noticing in your own life or in your friends' lives or in conversations when people tentatively, bravely try and drop something in there because they do need help and they're testing to see if you're a safe person to speak to. So I really hope it inspires people to get more interested and compassionate. Thank you, Tina, for your time today. And I look forward to having you back again.
Thank you, Deanna.
I hope you found that conversation insightful, encouraging, and also a reminder to all of us that what we see isn't always as it appears. People are going through a lot of things in their lives, and we would want that compassion shared to us, and that is something that we can offer to others without judgment. Instead, be curious and reach out, reach in, figure out a way that you can make someone's day a little better, and it might just start with a smile. I thank you very much for spending your time with me here today, and encourage you to please subscribe to the podcast, follow us on social media, check out our events. We have lots of ways that we can help you or someone that you love. Share this with a friend if there's someone that you know could benefit from this. And hey, keep smiling that beautiful smile, because the world really does need your sunshine. It means a lot that you spend this time with us and meet our experts and professionals who can help you through whatever life changes you're facing. Please refer to our terms of service available on our website, lifechangesmag.com. The link is in the show notes. Our disclaimer: Divorce Magazine Canada, Life Changes Magazine and channel, and divorce resource groups are intended to educate and provide quality, credible resource information. The contents should not be used as factual until consultation with the appropriate professionals for any guidance. Divorce Magazine Canada, Life Changes Magazine, and Life Changes channel, as well as the divorce resource groups, do not constitute endorsements for, nor liability for any claims made in the presenting of this information.